Recording, Chris? Okay, so welcome to our discussion session on textbooks. We're glad that you're here. Um, what we are going to do today is I'm going to spend a few minutes doing a little overview of some research related to textbooks and some research about online, openly available resources. And then, of course, the most important part, sharing and discussion. So we hope that you will help contribute to that sharing. And then please do take the time at the end of our session today to fill out our evaluation. So let's go ahead and get started. First of all, um, oops, I forgot to switch that. So there you go. There's our plan for the day. um, what does PR have to say about textbooks? This was challenging. There is not a lot of research out there on textbooks. There are things related to textbooks, but as far as, specific research on textbooks, very, very little. And if, for example, if you look at 2020 on this graph, there were only 17 papers directly looking at textbooks, college level textbooks. And the references up for all these data sets are at the bottom of this screen here. If we look at those studies, we find that most of them are still about secondary education textbooks. For example, if you look at the last data point, 2020 to 2022, um, the yellow bar is higher education. So there were like 6 or 7 papers on college level textbooks in those 2 years. Um, there were a few more, maybe 3, that were combining secondary and higher education, but just not a lot of stuff out there. Um, and what we find is the research that's there tends to be clustered in sort of main areas. Um, we completed database searches in JSTOR, Academic Search Ultimate, and of course the usual suspects, Phys-Port, PhysRev, PER, the American Journal of Physics, and the physics teachers. And we found that after many, many hours of searching, that the studies tended to be grouped into 4 main areas. The first area is how students and faculty use and perceive textbooks. One is those open resources, including freely available textbooks and how students use those. Equity and representation issues, which includes representations of women and other underrepresented groups, or cost impacts. And then the last area is errors or misleading information in textbooks. For our purposes today, we're going to focus on how students and faculty use and perceive the textbooks, cost impacts as a transitional topic to the OER resources. Now, this doesn't mean that the other stuff isn't important. I mean, we could spend an entire session on equity and representation, or an entire session on errors or misrepresentations in textbooks. So we're not saying that those things aren't important. It's just that we want to focus on these other issues because they sort of fit together. But the point I wanted to make here in showing you what I found when I was doing all this research is that studies on the effectiveness of one book versus another, or a traditional textbook versus a reformed textbook, there just isn't a lot. There is, as we're going to find out, some research that compares print textbooks, more traditional, with these open resources that have multimedia embedded in them. There is some research in that. In fact, most of the more current research does look at that. But as far as, oh, this is a great book and this isn't, that doesn't exist. So let's go ahead and get started. The first one I'm going to just very briefly review is this paper called The Perceived Value of College Physics Textbooks. And it basically points out the differences between what professors feel the importance of a textbook is versus what students do with that textbook and what they think is important. And they found, Podolewski and Finkelstein found, is that most students don't read the book, which mean some of us probably already knew. Um, if you look at these classes, there was a physics with calculus, two physics with calculus classes, an algebra-based class, and a conceptual class. And the averages for each category here are below. And 25% of students say they rarely look at their book. Another 38% say, well, sometimes. And only 37% say they often look at their book. All right. And when we look at when they're looking at their book, the majority of students are looking at that after class. 18% before class, an exception being the conceptual physics students. They do tend to look at the book ahead of class. And then there's another 21% that look at it about equally before or after. So they don't read the book. And what they're doing when they do read the book is they're not reading for as much for understanding or reading to learn. They're getting ready for their exam or they're doing their homework. And that's mainly when they're opening the book. And the study did have some qualitative, like interview type resource, data presented where they interviewed the students. And the students are saying, yeah, I really don't read the book. But if I'm getting ready for exam, I'm going to go to look at the formulas and make sure I've got them right down, right? And I'm going to use it to do my homework. So they're using their book, but not necessarily in the way we would want them to read their book. And they also found, this may be surprising, it was surprising to me, that there's very little difference in overall grade between people who never read their book and people who frequently read their book. So it doesn't appear that reading the book makes much difference to their overall grade. And I guess there's several ways we could look at that. Either we're just doing an awesome job and they don't need the book, or I don't know. I don't know how we would look at that, but that was a little bit surprising to me. Following up with that, almost 15 years later, another researcher, Ruggieri, looked at essentially the same kinds of questions. So we're going from, I think that was in 2006, that paper was published, to this one, which was published in 2020, and looking at a lot of the same kinds of questions. And what he found was that students still aren't reading their book. Okay, 15 years later, nothing's changed. And just kind of a clarification on these notations here. This is not AP physics. So this is college level physics. They call it analytical physics at their college, but it's basically a calculus-based physics class. This would be physics, calc-based physics 1, calc-based physics 2, and this is what they call an extended calc-based physics 1 that covers the same material as the physics 1 class, but they meet twice as often. Okay, in other words, there's twice as much class time over the semester. So, but same material covered. And then the two classes are combined and everybody takes the AP2. There's no extended AP2. Okay, so they're not reading their textbook. As you can see, 70% never or rarely, 53%, 41%. So it seems as they get a little more advanced in their physics, they're looking to get their book a little more often, which makes sense. Okay. But what they are doing instead of reading their book, they're using a heck of a lot of online resources. You can see that 88 to 97% of students are utilizing online resources, depending on which class they're in. So, wow. Okay, well, what are they doing online? They're looking at Chegg. They're looking at YouTube. They're looking at Khan Academy, all the usual suspects. Okay, so this is, we're seeing a switch. As the resources are developed online, students are going to use them. There is a huge body of research in how students are using resources like Chegg and YouTube and Khan Academy. That is beyond what this session was supposed to be talking about. But as I was researching for this and trying to find, okay, things that looked at textbooks, I'm like, wow, there's so much research into these online resources. Maybe the PR interest group needs to look at this, you know, and talk about, how the students are using that and how we can guide them to use those resources more effectively. At any rate, um, students are getting more electronic textbooks when they do get a textbook. Some students are simply not getting a textbook at all. And that came out in Mr. Ruggieri's textbook research. But a significant portion, almost 50% of the students, are getting an electronic book rather than a print book. Um, and they cite cost as a critical issue, which is, we can understand that. If anybody who's been in a classroom know that students struggle with the price of textbooks. In fact, 87%, based on this data, um, feel that um, their choices were guided primarily by cost, not necessarily what they wanted. I did see another paper that discussed print versus online. And when you talk to the students, at least this researcher found, they'd prefer to have a textbook that they could write in, a paper textbook, but they feel like the cost is just prohibitive. And that's why they're getting an electronic textbook. Um, Another resource that I found looked specifically at community college students and how that cost of a book affected them not only in their finances, but in their actual success. And they found, surprisingly, that um, lower priced textbooks were correlated with higher rates of ABC or pass. All right. In other words, if the textbooks are lower cost, success rates go up. Now, this was only at one school, so just keep that in mind. They believed that it was a result of switching to open resources, openly available resources, which resulted in more students getting a book rather than trying to take the course without a book. And over the course of their research, which, if I remember right, was 4 years. Don't quote me on that, but I seem to remember they did this over 4 years, a couple years before the switch and a couple years after. They had the same instructors and the same material covered over the period of their research. Um, Another resource I found looked at the Florida Virtual Campus. This, unfortunately, was never published. I only got a draft of it. But the draft found that they did a survey of 22,000 students, post-secondary students, and asked them about textbook costs. And 67% of students indicated that they had not, at least once in their college career, they had not bought a required book because of the cost. 48% of them had taken fewer classes because they could not afford the textbooks for their classes. 46% had at least once not registered for a course because they couldn't afford the book. And 26% at least once signed up for a course without getting the book and then dropped the course because they realized they couldn't pass it without the book. So Textbooks do affect how students behave. All right, which kind of brings us to, well, what happens if you adopt an openly available textbook, like, for example, just to throw one out there, OpenStax. Okay. If you're going to do that, we want to know how that affects students and what happens. And so, this last couple things I'm going to talk about before we open it up to discussion is, two groups who actually did do that. They said, well, what happens when we switch? Let's research that. The first group did it at one school. Um, and they looked to see, well, what happened as far as success rates, et cetera, if we changed to, and I believe this group did use OpenStax. I don't remember exactly. Um, I read so many papers. Okay, so what they did is they looked specifically at the algebra-based course. And again, over a period of years, they looked before and after switching. They found no statistically significant change in grade distributions. They did find a minor negative shift in the class survey. The class is a learning attitudes survey. It's a very well documented, frequently used, validated instrument to look at attitudes about science. They found a minor negative shift, but that's actually pretty common in physics classes, especially traditionally taught physics classes, that the class typically shows a minor negative shift. They found that professors liked customizability. Most students judged the book as equivalent or better quality than their others, but they still don't seem to use the book any more than they used the book before. Okay, so nothing much changed there. Um, a second group did the same basic kind of study, looking at the same basic questions, but they looked at it over multiple institutions. I mean, this was a huge study. I have the numbers here for, and again, all of these, this presentation will be available, so you'll be able to get to these resources if you're interested. Um, But they looked at 15 different courses in 10 colleges, which included 6 community colleges. And that's why I picked this one to talk about, because so little research includes community colleges, and that's where we're at. That's what you guys do. So I wanted to look at this one because they did make a point to include community colleges. They looked at 15 different courses, not just science courses, but they had business, and there was a literature class. I forget the list, but basically they, across the board looked at different classes, over 16, almost 17,000 students. And what they found, that looking at the courses overall, there's no significant differences in completion rates. There's no significant differences in pass rates, and overall course grades. Um, there were some mixed results, but most showed no statistical differences in overall course grades between having a traditional textbook and an openly available resource textbook. So, with all of that little quick review of the little bit that we were able to find on textbooks, what are your thoughts? And what is your favorite book and why? Do you use a traditional or reformed, based on PER principles? That's what we mean by reformed textbooks. And what influences your choice? And do you use an online textbook or other resources? And how's it working? And I know Joe has used a reformed textbook before, and I'm hoping that he'll share his insights into that. But I want to open it up to discussion for you guys now.
So, this is Renee Lathrop. I think you can hear me.
Yeah.
Okay. So yeah, I was raised on Holiday, Resnick, and Walker. And for the longest time, that's what we did with our students because we did it, you know. So it was sort of very much like, well, this was good for us, and so it'll be good for you. Um, and I've been hearing a lot of the same stuff where the students don't open the book or haven't been reading it. And that so we're looking at other books to use. And the other physics teacher at my institution has been really loving the mastering and the Pearson products and stuff. And so we've been doing a switch to that because I have been here, like I really like teaching a class online and the students like the online resources. They like interacting with something. They like, you know, and so I didn't know if anybody had any information about the Pearson products and how, because from what you've showed, it seems like that there's not a lot of, but when we saw the presentation by them, it seemed like that all their stuff is like, wow, everybody's succeeding. Students love this. But again, it could be their educational pitch that they do to sell their products and everything. And so I would be really interested to hear what other people have to say if they've tried the mastering and the Pearson products. But
I might jump in because I'm gonna head out at 12:30. I've used Pearson mastering physics before. I don't think that there was any great improvement to my students. I mean, doing online homework is great because you can see students do practice and all that, but it usually rewards the students who are kind of working harder and more the A students, if I may use that. It seems like the students who are struggling didn't get too much help with online homework. That's my thought. I use Pearson for, and I think Anthony has used it and might still be using it, but I used it for a bunch of years, almost 10 or, and, and, and then I, obviously the cost is a tricky part. I think it's only 2 or 3 years ago that we moved away from using online homework. But yeah, my thinking is not much.
yeah, I love not using online homework. So I'm hesitant about their products and stuff, but I know that the students love it. And so um I appreciate Tony you sharing what you've seen.
Mm. Well, I used mastering physics for a while as well. Actually for probably 4 or 5 years. Um, and what I found, what my biggest concern was, is that, as a physicist, I care about process. Are you thinking about the problem appropriately? Can you give me a good free body diagram? Are you working through the process right? And my students got used to this very quickly because they knew that they could have that last line with the number wrong, but if their process was 100% all the way and they got that wrong answer because they multiplied 2 by 3 and got 5, you know, they had the physics right, you know? So that was the problem that I had with mastering. It was, I've got the answer. Well, how did you get it? I didn't see the process of physics coming out of it. So,
Yeah, and that's something that I do a lot with my calc-based students is I have my own problem sets,
yeah.
which I tell them I'm like, okay, these are called proofs because you have to prove to me you know what you're talking about. And I want to see every line like at like why are you doing this? What are you doing here? Da, 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 and everything.
Mm.
And you know, one student basically said he's like, so I have to prove to you like so I'm ignorant until proven otherwise. And I'm like, exactly. Like I want to see you prove to me that you know what you're talking about. And so the students always seem to like my proofs. So I really, you know, I did a poster presentation at APT once about it and everything. So I've kept with that, but it is time intensive. to get them to do that. And, but once you get them doing that, then like if you have the same group semester after semester, then they're already on board. But it is time intensive.
Elena, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, I inherited, I don't remember which book by now, but it was with WebAssign, and I switched to Mastering and Young and Friedman. And the reason was the content and the depth of the content. I loved the diversity of the problems. I loved how problems were organized, in the increasing order of rigor and plenty of choices in there. Um, I also loved the support and the feature of having ability to edit the problem. So it will be different wording, but maybe problem is the same, but you can add your own problems to your students' homework. At the same time, it will be automatically graded and providing immediate feedback to students whether they are right or wrong, which is not possible if I wait for submission of the homework by students. So that was my choice. Now about the price of the book. When that happened, and that was about 15 years ago, the price of the book was about, with the mastering, it was roughly $300, which is insane. And all the instructors in our college would recommend students to take an old copy because the content does not change that much. And we were spanked right away. We were told, you're not allowed to do that. You're not allowed to give your books. You're not allowed to, promote old versions. We have to support our publisher. Then I started the other way around, and I started talking to publishers. And currently, Pearson provides textbook with mastering for something like $55, I believe, which is quite manageable compared to 300 with the current price hike. But our bookstore gets another 40. That makes the textbook unmanageable. Yet this low price of Pearson comes as an incentive to subscribe everyone. So all the students on day one have the textbook. So whether they like it or not, they pay this $50. Now, do they use the textbook? They have the textbook. They paid the textbook whether they like it or not. They're not reading it. So my question to this survey that shows that price is what keep them from using the textbook. Is that the easiest answer that they feel that people will feel sympathetic about, and they just put it, not just, I'm not reading the book, why would I buy it? That's what I read between the lines behind the behavior. They're given the book. Some of them read. They will read whatever you supply, and they will chip in for the textbook. But most of them just simply not reading. They using chat. That's my experience. No matter, and I experimented with different textbooks. Night was someone's favorite, and I decided, well, it's so chewed, to small bits and pieces. Why won't we switch to night and see if students are doing better? No difference, maybe worse even. They didn't like night. They liked when I checked with them if they liked the book better. So I had a sample, I showed them, I showed what features the book has. Maybe they saw the book the one and only time. they loved it. But when it was adopted, nobody likes it. It's a, it's the same wording, high price, hard to understand, uh, and things like that. So something that I nowadays uh, regard at much lower, I see it more like excuse than a final truth because I see no matter what, they're not reading it. Even if I give them the book, which I will do if student will come to me and ask for the textbook. Here is the book, take it.
Yeah, and I think that was, um, what the one group of researchers found is that even if they have the book, they're not looking at it, and you know, so it's really a second question. You mentioned you had shown your students the different books. There was an article that I chose not to put up into this discussion, but it was super interesting. I did put a link for everybody here. There's the DOI for it up in the group chat. It's basically the name of this article is Student Selection of the Textbook for an Introductory Physics Course. And what this particular professor did is it was a he or a she, I don't know, LS Dake. So let's just say Dr. Dake uh, actually gave their students a stack of books and said, here, select the textbook for next term. And was very surprised at how very seriously they took it. They divided up into committees and they would meet in the lab and they would have these really in-depth discussions about the different features of the textbooks. And he or she was just totally amazed by how seriously the students took this task. And the book they selected was Night. And he talked about how just how the process. It was an interesting little read, like I said, but I did not include it, but there you go.
Thank
So
you.
I've got it there for your reference if you'd like.
Is Sherry, I don't know it with these papers and stuff that you presented, were pretty much all of them face-to-face classes, or did it mention
Um,
anything about the delivery?
yeah, they did. In fact, I mean, I have a large list of resources that I found, and if anybody is interested in my full list, I'd be happy to send them. There was research looking at online delivery. But again, I had to narrow it down. And since the topic was textbooks, I try to keep it to where the main focus was the textbook or the other curricular resource rather than the delivery,
Right.
But I do have those types of things available.
Yeah, I was just wondering if there was a difference, a significant difference between how online students sort of interacted and used the textbook. I'm sure there must be papers on that.
I have not, I
Okay.
didn't read
No.
anything like
Okay.
that. Mm-mm.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't remember anything like that. But again, even when I was researching, uh, if the if the topic of the paper was more about the delivery than the book, I actually just I didn't even include it in my list. So it may be that it's out there and I didn't find it, or didn't include it. So the questions that I ask, um, now I've lost it, but I did put it in chat, the questions I had asked. About, just things to think about for the discussion. Joe, where's Joe? Joe, there he is. um, you've used matter and interactions. I know that Tony made a really quick some comment about it before heading out. Would you like to provide us your insights on matter and interactions? If you're not familiar with matter and interactions is one of those what would be called a reform textbook. It's based on physics education research principles. Um, so, could you fill us in on your insights, Joe?
Yes, sure. I just put a link in the chat to the brand new fifth edition, which literally came out. This is April now, so 2 months ago. Uh, and I have the fourth edition. This was the last edition that I actually taught out of. I've been technically retired for 3 years now, going on four. Uh, so let me just begin by saying I think the personality of a course comes from the instructor, and the textbook is one component of that personality. And I, I'm going to try very hard not to start a holy war here, but I do think textbook choice is significant because it's part of the flavor, it's part of the personality that we bring to the course as the instructor because we tend to adopt the terminology of the author, we tend to adopt the mathematical conventions and so forth of the author. Uh, and so in 1999, in the summer of 1999, I got a letter from this unknown person named Bruce Sherwood asking me if I would like to test drive a new curriculum uh, that had been developed at Carnegie Mellon for an honors course. Now, how Bruce got my name and address at the community college that I was at, I have no idea, but nevertheless, he did. And so I showed it to my department chair with whom I shared an office, and we were the physics people there, and we said, let's do it. And in those days, the book was $15. It came comb bound, and yes, that's 1.5, and that was just to cover the cost of printing. It had not been published, and ironically, they did the E&M volume first and then they did the mechanics, which is sort of opposite of how the development usually goes. And let me tell you, that fall semester of 1999, I ran into a brick wall. Almost every student failed. Uh, but they told me in the end that that was because they didn't read the textbook. Now, we had been using I can't think of the author. It was a big blue book. Uh, Serway. We had been using Serway since the inauguration of the calc-based physics. So this was sort of a radical change. Again, a change in approach. But we found that with matter and interactions, when the students actually read the book, they discovered that there's a storyline there. The very first physicsy equation in the book is the expression for relativistic momentum. Boom, gamma mv, there you are. And suddenly you're doing relativistic calculations. There's Lorentz factors thrown in. And of course, they're shown how all of this reduces to the standard Newtonian stuff. So that was a bit of a change. Suddenly we had to talk about relativity, which I thought was very, very cool because let's face it, that's something that our intro students very seldom ever get. But the biggest thing that I think M&I brought to the picture was the very tightly woven computational storyline. And that goes through into the fifth edition. Now, I confess that I have not yet gotten my hands on a fifth edition. That's kind of hard for retired people to do. But I plan to very soon. But the digital edition has embedded Web v Python demonstrations and homework videos in the e-version of the book. Now, there's not going to be a hardbound version. It used to be that Wiley would do a hardbound version like this because, believe it or not, there were some people who refused to adopt M&I because they said, well, all physics textbooks must be thick, hardbound books like this. That is literally their reason for not adopting it. It's too thin to be a physics textbook. So the publishers had to produce this to convince the R1s, I guess, I don't know, to adopt it. Uh, but well, sort of lost my train of thought there. But this computational, oh, I know. And so there aren't any hardbound copies anymore. Everything is loose leaf. It turned out that Wiley found the loose leaf was the biggest seller, the loose leaf version. And so it's either, if you go to the Wiley website now, it's only going to be loose leaf or the E version. Um, but this computation, suddenly students were learning Python, this language that had been around for about a decade before that, but suddenly coding became an integral part of the experience. And that was really the game changer. And I had students who would tell me that they learned more about programming in their intro physics course than they did in their programming courses. Now, back in the 90s, Java was all the rage, and they would take Java and I say, can you write a functioning program in Java? No, Mr. Hefner, I can't, but I can write a complete VPython program. And I'm like, oh, okay, that's pretty cool. So, uh, and these were primarily engineering students, but I thought that was an interesting take. But uh, it really changed the way I taught uh, because it addressed things, particularly energy concepts, that were not addressed in the way that when I suffered through Halliday and Resnick in the mid 1980s. Uh, I was just confused by everything. And one thing that I think M&I does very well is there's a storyline there. And speaking of the reform that Sherry, Arnold Ahrens, you can hear Arnold Aaron's voice in Matter and Interactions. Feynman is with us in Matter and Interactions. In fact, Bruce Sherwood taught out of the Feynman lectures for a number of years out at Caltech, and Feynman's voice is in here. There is a whole body of literature that is embodied in the reforms in this book, and that was true from day one. So it was new in that there were some new voices because I didn't know who Ruth Shabai and Bruce Sherwood were at the time. But then in 1999, they made the move from Carnegie Mellon. I'm sorry, in 2000, they made the move from Carnegie Mellon to NC State. And I drove 3 hours for their interview colloquium, and I took a carload of students with me. And the department chair was there. And he heard the talk on the presentation. They wanted to bring their PER research to NC State to develop the next edition of the book. And he said, I think this is just too hard for our introductory students here. And Bruce Sherwood stood up. He said, meet Joe Hefner. He pointed me out in the audience and he said, he's brought his community college students with him. I was the first person in North Carolina to use Matter and Interactions. And Bruce tells me to this very day that the discussion I had with Chris Gould, who was the department chair, convinced him not only to hire Bruce and Ruth, but to allow them to adopt Matter and Interactions for their intro physics sequence at NC State. So if I ever have a claim to fame, it's that I talked NC State into adopting Matter and Interactions. And ironically, because I don't have a PhD, they won't hire me to teach the course down there, which I think is very hysterical. But I'll grind that axe later. But that began Bruce and Ruth's presence in the PER program at NC State, and that led directly to the development of the fourth edition of the book. So a lot of the reforms that are present in this curriculum were done at NC State. And they were sort of impressed that, a community college sort of pioneered this approach. And I used it up until the last course I taught in 2021. It has just so profoundly influenced me. And even when I taught out of another textbook like Hewitt, I still found myself using the Matter and Interactions terminology. It's just had such a deep influence on me. There are hints of Jackson in matter and interactions. There's a chapter where the authors, yeah, I see everybody talking about electromagnetic field transformations. And I would tell students, okay, so if you go on to get a master's or PhD in physics, you're going to see this again in a much harder context. But remember, you saw it here in a 2-year college first, and it's really not that bad. It's kind of simple. You just got to work through a little bit of the math. Uh, that's a very, 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 very broad overview. I could easily talk for a day and a half about this. Uh, it's not free, but I am of the opinion that just because a textbook is free doesn't necessarily mean it's better than anything that's out there. I think it's more complicated than that. And I actually tried to get some funding to purchase a set of textbooks to keep in the classroom. And of course, oh, there's no money for that while they were hiring new administrators left and right. Just give me $4,000 to buy a set of textbooks to keep in the classroom. But I think there are ways around the money issues. The other issues, I'm not so sure there are
Yeah.
always easy ways around because you've got to manipulate people psychologically. And it's hard to manipulate academics because we know when we're being manipulated. Uh, but that's sort of my 2 cents. It
Okay.
kept me from getting bored with teaching. Uh,
Okay. But uh, it's very interesting that they're integrating those multimedia things because one of the things I did find when I was researching all of this was that um, embedded or linked multimedia presentations with textbooks seems to make a difference to students. That was one thing I did see over and over again in the research. So that was very interesting. Kareem, you made a comment back there somewhere that you were using OpenStax. Would you like to share any thoughts that you have? And if anybody else is too, since we've not heard from anybody who's using that.
Okay. Well, we switched to OpenStax primarily because of the cost. We were under pressure from the administration and even the state in Florida to keep the costs down. And because every semester we have to fill out a form saying that we chose a textbook for this or that reason, that there's an older version that's available, and so on. So we had to justify why we were using any of this. So we decided to take the jump and we took OpenStax, both for the calc-based and also for the algebra-based courses. And so, of course, the price is zero, so students have access to it. I've had actually some students buy the physical textbook, which I mentioned at the beginning of the semester. I said you have 3 options. You can you can read it online, you can get a PDF if you'd like to, or you can even buy one. And I was surprised to see some students actually buying the book a few times. So in terms of it is interesting. It's not completely, I wouldn't qualify, I don't think it qualifies as reformed in a sense of using a lot of PR. It's well written. I have some reservations about some of the choices they make about notations and that, but I guess any textbook there was something that you would like and not like about any textbook. It's a lot of reading for students, so I assign it, but I don't particularly use it. I don't really do too much with it in class because I've developed my own material separately. So I don't, every now and then some question will come up and we will look at it. But otherwise, it's a good place to start with free textbook. But in terms of pedagogy, I don't think it has a significant impact on what students learn. I mean, we haven't measured the specific impact of the textbook, but it has it's supposed to be something you can edit. But when I look at it and I say, well, all these changes that I would like to make, I don't think I might as well write a new one.
Well, I was going to ask if you had used any of the customizable stuff,
Yeah,
but
they
that
keep
you've answered that.
yeah, they keep saying that, and I said, okay, let's look at that. And I said, I don't know if I have the
Yeah.
courage to, because to me, there's a certain logic that things would have, and so you have to have a certain order in the topics, and you can't just randomly go in and make some changes like that. So it has
Right.
to be all coherent. And I don't know, one day maybe I'll do it, but not today.
Mhm. Yeah, and Renee, I just saw your comment about if you grade it, they will do it.
Yeah.
There was actually, again, like I said, I've done a lot of research here trying to get ready for this session. One of the papers that I did see made some recommendations for trying to get students to read the book.
Mhm.
And that was one of the things that they mentioned was, okay, well, there's going to be a reading quiz
Yeah,
and it's going to
and
be graded and they that seemed to increase the number of students who were actually reading the book.
yeah, and the question then comes to, okay, so they read it, did they take anything in? Did they absorb anything? Like, Joe talked about a storyline and sort of hearing the voice of the author and matter and interactions, and can they see that? Can they understand that? And I don't know if they can. I think that, you know, but definitely helping them to open the book and take notes on something, it then registers that they did it or that they used maybe an online source and took notes on the same highlighted points. But
I don't know that I agree, Renee. I don't know that students think that math and physics textbooks can have a voice. I think they're all conditioned to think that they're all just sort of like the Charlie Brown teacher with a few integral signs shown in, thrown in every now and then.
Elena, you had, oops, your hand up.
Yeah, I had a question for Kareem. You use your own resources.
Mhm.
Do you have any information of how often your students use your resources? So my premise is maybe when they see that it's a standard textbook, they automatically think that answers will be available on the internet because it's widely used source. Maybe for you, they will be using your specific resources.
Yeah, I mean it's graded, so they have to because I structured it as like videos with questions following the videos, and so there's a whole sequence of topics. I'm breaking things down into multiple videos with interactive questions. I use a software called SoftChalk for that, and so they have all sorts of things that they need to do, and so and it's part of the grade. It's 10% of the grade, so I know they do it. Now, sometimes I'm a little disappointed because they've done it, but they seem to not know what's in it. So that's something I'm changing this semester. I'm going to keep assigning them, but they will no longer be part of the grade, and I'll see what difference it makes. Because I have the suspicion that something is, floating around. Because that was the same issue I had with the online homework system. I used Mastering Physics from the day it came out, and then over the first few years, I would get a lot of questions from the students. How do I do this? What's going on with this and that? And then over time, I started having no questions whatsoever, almost perfect grades. But in class and test, there's no correlation between the grades on the homework and the in-class test. So I decided to stop using any online homework. I tried Expert TA for a while, didn't like it so much. I mean, it's not bad, but just decided I'm not going to use any homework system anymore. Instead, I use something from Pearson, actually. It's called Learning Callytics. It doesn't get a lot of publicity. It's almost unknown, and they haven't really updated for that thing for years. It looks a little old now, but it's very nice because you can do group activities and they can get feedback I mean, they can get the answers right away. And you can do things like drawing, and you can have different kinds of questions, not just the multiple choice questions. And I use them for group, in-class group work. And so I assign like 10 questions and they have to work together and work on those. So I like that because they gives me a chance to sit with them and as they go through the work. And because it's online, they can get as soon as they submit the answer, they know if it's right or wrong. And so I give them multiple attempts and they can try it again if they missed it. And so far that seems to be doing well.
Is it expensive?
No, it's $12 a semester, 6 months, and $20 for a year. But I
Can you
had to
say
write my
again
own questions because I didn't
what
like
resource is that? Can you repeat what are you
learning
using?
Callytics. Let me type it in here.
Mhm. Yep. And I'm just going to, while you're doing that, Kareem, Dean, we'd love to hear a little bit about your approach to textbook. We only have a few minutes left, but we still would love to hear from Dean. And I have put URL, a tiny URL there for our evaluation form. Please take time when we're done to fill that out. And I will put a slide up when Dean's done, telling us a little bit about his approach to textbooks.
I always, at the end of the semester, I ask my students with this survey, what was most useful for helping you learn, what was least useful, and textbook was always on the bottom, no matter what I did. I tried everything. I tried, the pre-lecture quizzes, whatever. It was always at the bottom, and so I decided to go with a OER, and then couldn't find anything that my head of department and my advisor, my faculty advisor person were happy with for the class. So I ended up writing my own. It uses what's called parallel pedagogy, which is a lot like spiral physics, if you've heard of that. But yeah, it's short. It's exactly like what my students need to know according to the states and all of that, and nothing else. And I do it through Perusall, which I really like. I know Sherry's not talking about how to access textbooks and those things, but Perusall builds a social media site around your materials. And so the students are required before class to go in and read the book, comment on it, reply to each other's comments, ask questions, all that kind of stuff. And it's worked really well. I like that I can make up my own notation now. I don't have to use n for normal force. It can be fn. I can put in unit vectors. I can, arrange things how I want. I've also learned that there's no perfect way to do it, which is super annoying. So yeah, that's what I'm doing.
And if you're interested in I'll plug for Dean since he didn't plug himself. Dean had an article in the TYC Tidbits column in the Physics Teacher where he talked about his approach and how he uses that parallel pedagogy in his class. So another way of looking at textbooks. So I encourage you to go look at that if you're interested. Again, it's in the Physics Teacher, and it was just a few months ago. I don't remember which month, but it was recently. Anything else before we wrap things up? We have a couple minutes yet.
But it still looks like the textbook is still around no matter what we do. I mean, it's still the standard reference, and looks like what we're doing is just something on the sides, but the central. Because I think that the bulk of the places that teach massive amount of students, they still rely exclusively on textbooks, and so that's always going to be the comparison item. We're always, oh, how is your class? Oh, based on your textbook, we can gauge your class or something like that. It's always
I feel like there's a lot of pressure from like being at a community college. We have to have our students transfer and we have to have our classes transfer. And so the 4 years, they won't take us seriously unless we have a serious textbook, and I hate that.
Yeah. I have to always argue with all my administration, tell them, don't listen to the university. They don't know what they're doing. But everybody will, what? What are you talking about?
Well, it's like Laurie McNeil said in her talk in St. Louis, that at the graduate level, there is a canon: Goldstein, Jackson,
Right.
Landau, Lifshitz, and I can't remember. There was another one. I don't remember what it was. And that same, there is a canon in undergrad physics: Halliday and Resnick, Griffiths. I guess Griffiths. If Griffiths would do a classical mechanics, he would have the entire undergraduate curriculum nailed down. But yeah, and I think that does restrict us, Renee, because I have colleagues here in North Carolina who simply refuse to use any resource that the nearest four-year college to them that takes their transfer students will not acknowledge. And so they say, nope, I have to do it like so-and-so does it. And I'm like, no, you don't. You just have to do it better. You don't have to do it exactly like they do.
Yeah, so I've done a lot with trying to like almost develop my own resources apart from the textbook. So like the textbook is the textbook, but like everyone sort of said here, the students don't read it. And I tell the students, I'm like, you can use whatever resource that you want because physics really hasn't changed. So if you find something that you like the way that it explains it and everything, and I do suggest a few and everything to them, but I try to have everything based off of just hey, this is the content, this is what we're doing, this is what you have to hand in, so that way they don't have to buy a resource. But like for transfer, the schools will say, "Oh, well, what book did you use?" And I'll say Holiday, Resnick, and Walker, but like very loosely based on Holiday, Resnick, and Walker.
Yeah.
We have reached 4 o'clock, so I do want to thank everyone for the wonderful discussion. It was great to have everyone here. Please take a few minutes. It's a very, very short survey, just an evaluation of the session today. There's a QR code here and a tiny URL, which I also put in the chat. And I thank you so much for all the stuff today. Textbooks. PER research on textbooks was the title of today's session. All right. All right. Any last minute questions or comments before we stop the recording?
Thank you, Sherry, and everybody else.
Well, thank you all for
Yeah,
being
thank you.
here.